Well, let's focus on your book that was just published last October, I believe, Taken into Custody. And can you give a sort of summary of what that book is about to the viewers?
Well, this calls attention to the abuses of the divorce industry. It shows what is really taking place in this country under the name of divorce. I mean, most Americans would be very shocked if they realized what is happening in this country under the guise of divorce.
And let's talk about that.
Cliches about custody battles and nasty divorces, but what is in fact happening in this country is the government is engaged in appropriating, in confiscating people's children in huge numbers under the name of divorce.
Now, you're going to have to kind of set that up for some of the listeners who haven't been inducted into this process.
Well, most people, again, we hear these cliches about custody battles and so forth, but the government now claims, even if you have not agreed to a divorce, even if you've given no grounds for divorce, once your spouse files for divorce, the government essentially seizes control of your children. Your children become effectively wards of the state. The government then tells you when you're allowed to see your children. They then can confiscate virtually everything you have in one form or another in the name of providing for your children, even if you've never failed to provide for your children yourself. So if you're taking care of your children in your own home, minding your own business, not engaging in any divorce or any other litigation, you can be hauled into court. Your children are confiscated, essentially. You are told to pay child support. You are told to pay lawyers. You can be arrested for allegations of child abuse or domestic violence, even if there's not a shred of evidence.
Well, let's take this a step at a time because there's so much information to talk about here in the process. The first stage, when a petition for dissolution, as it's often called, is filed, that triggers a panoply of legal or of legislative and judicial authority. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you might just talk a little bit more about that particular phase. When you say that the courts have confiscated your children, essentially, elaborate a little bit on what you mean by that.
Well, the court claims the right, when a divorce petition is filed, they claim the right to seize control of the children. From then on, the court makes all decisions, ultimately, about what is best for the children, even if the parents have done nothing to, or at least one of the parents has done nothing to forfeit the right to make the decisions for themselves about what's best for their children. Again, this is obfuscated by legal jargon. We talk about divorce and we talk about custody battle, but the fact is you can be in your own home minding your own business. If your spouse decides to divorce you without any grounds whatsoever and without your agreement, you are simply hauled into court. You're not formally charged with any crime. Yet you are told when you are allowed to see your children. You are told that you must pay child support payments for your children, ostensibly for your children. You are told you must pay lawyers you have not hired. You are told that you will be arrested if you try to see your children when you are not authorized by the court. You are told you will be arrested if you don't pay a lawyer you haven't hired. You are told you are arrested if you do not pay child support that may amount to your entire income, and I mean that your entire income. You are arrested if you are accused of domestic violence or child abuse without a shred of evidence that you've committed them. So the court has basically claims the power, divorce courts claim the power to criminalize parents, to take control of their children, to basically destroy their private lives without the parents having done anything legally wrong.
But now let me play devil's advocate here a little bit. And as you know, we represent men. 99% of the clients of Cordell & Cordell are men. So I'm used to looking at this from the side of dads and divorce. But let me be devil's advocate here. What is the alternative, given that you have a party who has said, one of the two parents has said, I want out, and I'm not going to live with you, and I'm going to, absent the court's participation, I'm going to exercise my physical control of the children. So outside the legal system, you'd have potentially this very physical dispute between the two parents. How do you impose order in that situation?
Well, there's no, you can't prevent people from leaving. If a spouse wishes to leave her, a woman wants to leave her husband, then you can't stop her, but she has no right to take the children with her. And that's what has to end. The courts have not only given her, but encouraged her to take the children with her, with financial incentives.
So you would,
if she wants to, but she has no right to take the children there for decades, for centuries, in fact, in the Anglo-American world. We have had a principle: the parents have the right to the care, custody, and companionship of their children. It's fine. The government should be, and always has in the past, before the divorce revolution, the government always has guaranteed the parent-child bond. In other words, parents have a right to their children, and nobody has a right to interfere with or take away your children. If your spouse wishes to leave, then she can leave, but she has no right to take the children with her.
Okay, so
and there are many alternatives. There's shared parenting. There's a whole variety of alternatives. But the bond between parents who have done nothing legally wrong, and their children, has always been and should be sacrosanct before the creation of no-fault divorce.
All right, so let me then suggest what would be a rule that you'd probably find reasonable, and I think I would find reasonable, is one in which the party who's disturbing the status quo, in other words, the party who has said, I want to out, I want to move on, that party would not have a right to disturb that absent a finding of some court, which I think we're stuck with inevitably, is some court passing judgment about primary custody. I don't think we can exclude a judicial system entirely from this process. I mean, I wish we could, but would you not think a better system would be one that would preserve the rights of the party who's wanting to keep the marriage intact or wanting to keep the child in the home as he or she's known it?
Well, yes, absolutely. That's precisely right, and that's what's wrong with the system now. Is the government, the courts take the side of the parent that wants to destroy the marriage. In fact, there have been studies that show that the parent that destroys the marriage is the one most likely to get custody of the children and the financial incentives, rewards that come with it.
And that's mom typically when you're talking about younger children, right?
Yes, that's right.
And that's an interesting statistic that gets very little attention. I've talked a lot about it, and I suspect you have too. And that's that, you know, when you're talking about a divorce in which the parents are in the 30s, or particularly the mom is in the 30s, then there's just this period of time when moms seem to be particularly vulnerable to moving on. Often they've met someone else, perhaps in the workplace, but it's generally in the 30s that the mother decides to move on and pursue what she perceives to be a better deal, a better life. It's the counterpart to that stereotype that has been much publicized about what guys do often in their 40s and perhaps early 50s, and there's some truth to that statistic, but it's equally true what women will do in the 30s. And the reason that's potentially more pernicious, I think you'd agree, is that you do have younger children there, and furthermore you have a mother who's insisting on her right to take those children with her to that new deal, whatever it is.
Oh, that's right.
So let's talk a little bit about the child support calculations. So let's assume the parties have gone through this divorce process, that statistically mom is likely to have primary custody of the kids, all other things being equal, and now there's this calculation of child support. You've had a lot to say about that, haven't you?
Oh, yes. Well, child support effectively acts as a kind of subsidy on divorce. It enables and even encourages mothers to simply walk away, take the children with them, and basically plunder the father for everything he has and have him jailed without trial. Again, even if he's done nothing legally wrong, he can simply be jailed if he cannot pay amounts of child support that could be 60, 70, 80, or 100% of his income.
And that's interesting because we think that we've rid ourselves of the debtor's prison that existed in Victorian England. But it seems that there are remnants of it as to this particular topic, and the only other I can think of is IRS obligations.
No, this is much more severe than IRS obligations, and it's much more severe than even debtor's prison. At least in debtor's prison, the debtor incurred the debt. The debtor did something to incur the debt. Here, the obligor, so-called, the father doesn't have to do anything to incur a child support debt. The government simply assigns the debt to him. His children are confiscated. They're taken away from him. He is told he has to pay, ostensibly for the support of children, who he's never failed to support. He's always taken care of his children. He's always provided for his children. But suddenly his children are taken away, and he must pay. Now, so he's done nothing legally speaking to incur the debt. Thomas Hobbes said that no debt can arise except in some act. In other words, you have to do something to incur a legal obligation. Child support is the only legal obligation. You don't have to do anything to incur. It is entirely created by the government and by the actions of